So thank you everyone for coming. I get paid in cookies, so that's why I am here as well. So my name's Courtney Beebe, and I live in Cougar Gulch with many of you. So I'm looking forward to some feedback and maybe some extra information from some of our attendees. And for the rest of you, I hope that you will enjoy learning a little bit about where we live. So I am a historian in the sense that I have a degree in history and a certification in museum science, so that's why I'm affiliated with the Museum of North Idaho. I'm not a professional, and I'm certainly not an architectural historian. So a lot of the information we'll talk about here today comes from my partner in crime. Her name's Sharon Boswell. You may have known Sharon. She was a professor at North Idaho College, and she is an architectural historian. So she is the person who's teaching me as we do our historic survey of Cougar Gulch. So again, as you are listening, keep Sharon in your mind. She lives in Seattle, so she's not here today. So this is part of a 4-year project. The Cougar Gulch area is eligible to become a multi-property historic district. What that means is that it can be put on the National Register of Historic Places, and each property owner may opt their property into that district. So we have been investigating for about 4 years the properties in Cougar Gulch, and that's mostly what I'll be talking about here today. We'll just do a general overview of the history of Cougar Gulch. As we go through, if you have questions, I just ask that you keep questions and comments to the end. But that doesn't mean I expect you to just sit there. I'm going to ask you some questions too, so that you can help maybe inform me. I do intend to maybe challenge a couple long-held beliefs, and maybe we can have a conversation about what you know about the Gulch and what I've learned about the Gulch as well. So let's start with our brief history of Cougar Gulch. Oh, I'm going to go back one there. All right, so Cougar Gulch. Cougar Gulch is out of town, and we'll talk specifically about where it is, but I'd like to start with the geology. So if you look at the glacial Lake Missoula, which we're all familiar with, which was around in 12,000 to 15,000 years ago, Cougar Gulch is located about right there at the tip of part of the Lake Missoula flood. And as we talk about the geology, I think you'll see why this is important to its creation. So the Missoula flood was a glacial lake outburst flood from the Clark Fork River, and it would spread through North Idaho and into eastern Washington onto the Columbia River and onto the Columbia Plateau. So the structure of the gulch, if you know what a gulch is, it is a part of land that is carved by runoff water. So as the ice would move in and melt off, it would pull the sediment away, creating Cougar Gulch area. Cougar Gulch is full of some interesting interesting photographs that have turned the opposite way. So if everybody would like to turn their head to the right, you'll see that this is actually a volcanic plume. This is located on the Carousel Tree Farm. If you go through the gulch, you'll see all kinds of rock walls and volcanic plumes that were formed as the gulch was formed geologically. So this is the gulch. Let's start with this photograph right here. If you recognize this, then you lived in the gulch before 1960. So this is a 1940 photograph of the gulch, and the reason you can tell that is that is not Highway 95. Highway 95 was not constructed to go past the gulch where it is right now, as you can follow my pointer, until the 1950s and 60s. So this is Cougar Gulch Road, and you can see that there's a spur road off on the what will be the MONI property located right here. So this is the gulch. You can follow Cougar Gulch Road up and clear back into the mountains, into the back mountain range. Over here on this map, this is what we called our survey project area. So one of the questions, the first question is, when I'm going to survey a historic place, what are the boundaries going to be? So we had a lot of conversations about where does the gulch start, where does the gulch end, what are its sides. So this is the area that we have selected. This northern part follows a natural ridge. The southern part starts onto the mica flats, and then the rest of the border follows part of Cougar Creek. This is an aerial view of Cougar Gulch. I was lucky enough to go on a plane ride, and I took this out of the plane window. So this is from about 2 years ago. Cougar Gulch is formed on this side, on the north by Blossom Ridge. This is Blossom Peak. We have Signal Point, Mica Peak, and then we have the Mica Flats area starting at the top here. Now, some of you may have read about Deb Mitchell's article. This used to be a ski area long ago, so there was a ski lift, the road up to Signal Point. There was, I think it was a rope tow, if I remember right. So this was actually a ski area. So this is the roads of Cougar Gulch. Now, I decided to structure our historic survey based on these roads. This is a map drawn by Dawn Myers. Dawn lives on the Biddleston property in Cougar Gulch, and she created this artistic rendering of what the gulch looks like. So the beginning of Cougar Gulch starts here at the intersection with Highway 95 and Meadowbrook Loop. So when you come to Meadowbrook Loop and Cougar Gulch Road, it turns into what we call the upper gulch, or excuse me, the lower gulch area. Meadowbrook comes around in a loop with Clemenson Road going up along Blossom Ridge. Cougar Gulch Road follows Cougar Creek all the way back into those mountains. In this area off of the map is the Stimson Lumber property and the base of Signal Point. Now, the main arterials in Cougar Gulch are Thompson Road, Miller Road, Greens Ferry Road, and I'm going to stop there with my first question. Does anybody know why it's called Greens Ferry Road? Oh, we got maybe an answer here? Because there's a Greens Ferry in Post Falls in the back.
Well, there was a man named Green, and he had a ferry that went across the Spokane River.
That is right. And the way that people, thank you very much. So his name is Green. He had a ferry. And the people of Cougar Gulch used to access Post Falls by going over Greens Ferry Road to Greens Ferry and into Post Falls. We also have Stack Road here, and then the other main arterial, Meadowbrook Loop. Now, one of the things that gave me pause is, for those who live out there, this is not on the map, but there is a road called Miller Road. And if you're familiar with Miller Road, it is a tight, almost one-lane switchback that goes up onto Mica Flats. And that would be the Miller property. So the question that I have been asking myself and still ask myself, is Miller Road part of the gulch? Is the Miller property part of the gulch? Because that's how you access the Miller property, but it's actually not physically down in the gulch. So what I'd like to start here with is the history of the Coeur d'Alene tribe. So the history of the Coeur d'Alene tribe is directly tied to Cougar Gulch. And at this time, I would acknowledge that we are on the Coeur d'Alene tribal ancestral lands here in this room. And those of us that live in the Gulch, we do live on their ancestral lands. The Coeur d'Alene tribe would move through Cougar Gulch. As you can see here on this map, the dotted line creates part of the Coeur d'Alene Reservation around the lake and onto Cougar Gulch over here on the west side of the lake. This was the Cougar Gulch area was part of the Coeur d'Alene tribal reservation, and clear through, I believe, 1873, when the original reservation boundary was created after the Coeur d'Alene and the Coeur d'Alene Indian War. This area was actually removed and allowed into the allotment process in the 1880s. So for a period of time, the Coeur d'Alene tribe would use the Cougar Gulch area to access Post Falls and their tribal sacred lands over where I believe the Avista Dams are now. And I'm going to get the name wrong, but Kimlin Park? Thank you. So as late as the 1950s, I've talked to two people who've lived out there in Cougar Gulch. As late as the 1950s, there would be a seasonal migration pattern of tribal members through Cougar Gulch. These are from the Biddleston property. I live on the old Biddleston property. And these were found on the Biddleston property. They are some projectile points that were collected by the children, the Biddleston children who lived there. And it was a stopping point and a hunting ground for the Coeur d'Alene tribe. So let's talk about how Cougar Gulch got its name. So Cougar Gulch was actually named by, we think, the soldiers that lived at Fort Sherman. So Fort Sherman, where North Idaho College is now, and the Blackwell Island areas where a lot of the soldiers would spend, their time. If they ventured off into what they called the wall of trees, they would run into cougars. So Cougar Gulch was a high population area for cougars. You can see these two animals here. These are actually from hunters that were in Worley, which is a little south of Cougar Gulch, but to give you an idea of the size of the large cats, these are from the picture on the left is from 1910. I believe that this picture here on the right is from the 40s. So this was generally what you could encounter living in Cougar Gulch if you lived there. So one of the things that I have come across in listening to a number of oral histories and reading oral histories is the description of what it was like to live amongst the cougars. And we'll talk a little bit about how people lived, and I have some photographs of their living conditions. But when you think about it, you are a small family with children, and you're living in Cougar Gulch, and this is what Lucia Rhodia Saunders wrote about living on her property until 1915. The whole place was a dense forest, except for the little clearing around our cabin and barn. There were a lot of cougars in the wood, hence the name Cougar Gulch. My mother was scared to death of them. She could hear them at night. She said their cry was like a human cry, and it was very eerie. My mother had to hunt for the cows each evening. Scared as she would leave our 3 children alone in the house. There were no fences, and they would wander for miles away. She would be gone as much as 2 hours. And when I was 6 years old and I started school, the school was a big log building just across the line from our upper 40 acres. Ms. Boggs was my teacher, and she stayed with us. I could walk to school with her, but I think Ms. Boggs was just as afraid to walk through the jungle as I was. In her book, On the Edge of the Ice, Louise Shattuck interviewed a Cougar Gulch old-timer that she did not identify, who said that in those days, you could hear the big mountain lions howling and screeching from the ridges and hills like they were right beside you. Girl, if you haven't ever heard a cougar screech, you don't know what it's like to have a cold chill run right down the sides of your backbone. It's the fit name, Cougar Gulch, and I'm hoping this will work. It didn't work. I had a recording of what it sounds like to listen to a cougar. And if you've ever heard one, it's a high-pitched scream and a low purr, and a high-pitched scream and a low purr. So when we're done here, Google the sound of a cougar and think of yourself as a small child walking to school and what you would have heard as you left in the morning with your teacher. So after the big burn of 1910, the cougars actually left. So if you look at, boy, I don't know what our technology did because we're backwards again. If you look at maybe one of the previous maps of Cougar Gulch. All right, if you look at this map here, the fire of 1910 came around the end of the lake, Coeur d'Alene, on the southern part, through the Belle Grove area and onto Mica Flats. It did, however, reach clear as far into Thompson Road. The heat of the fire and the destruction that it caused chased all of the wildlife out of Cougar Gulch. The cougars have returned. We do hear or see them occasionally, but for the most part, there was a couple decades where there were no cougars in Cougar Gulch, or at least no reports of them. So we'll start with some settlement and land acquisition. This is a land acquisition plat. It reflects the beginning survey. So in the 1880s, the U.S. government took the land back from the Coeur d'Alene tribe. Through the allotment process, it made 310,000 acres available in the Worley area. We were just a territory at this time, so Idaho was still not a state. And they did not do the land survey until the 1880s, and it didn't really reach the Gulch until around the 1890s. During the turn of the century, Cougar Gulch settlers lived like this. So the picture here in the middle that you see, that is a log cabin from 1909. Most of the settlers would move in and do what's called stump farming. So they would cut down the trees, they would burn and pull out the stumps, and then they would begin to create their own hay farm. And this is important because it did lead eventually to homesteading a large part of the Gulch. You can see that some of the equipment that was used, we have this from the Coeur d'Alene Press, the 32 horsepower combine. So it took 32 horses to pull a combine through some of the hay fields. That's from the Biddleston property. We also have the 2 horseman hay wagon. Those were some of the implements that were used. These log cabins you can still find throughout the Gulch. We found a few of them that are still built into the hillsides. They're used mostly as outbuildings now. They also created a lumber industry out in Cougar Gulch. So this is the Perry and Johnson Mill. The Perry and Johnson Mill was in Cougar Gulch. So as people moved in, they cleared the land of the trees. They would give the wood to Perry and Johnson, who would mill it. And they did begin starting to build frame houses with that. That mill on the right in the upper portion, that is on, it's called, I believe, the Goetz property, G-O-T-Z, and now the Harrison property. They also created a mill. That is the last property at the end of Cougar Gulch Road. This sawmill here in the lower portion, this is actually still there, and this is an apple tree that grew up through it. So this is a personal lumber mill that was on the O'Reilly homestead. It's over on Thompson Road. And that has been there since, I don't know, the 1920s maybe, 1910s. But the apple tree is a heritage apple tree that I guess WSU collects their apple tree seeds from. The homesteaders engaged in subsistence farming by raising cows, goats, horses, chickens, pigs, and hay, as well as common vegetables and fruit trees. There was a dairy industry that developed. We'll talk about the dairy industry that developed, but ultimately people moved to the Gulch, built a cabin, and lived a fairly isolated life. If you remember from those maps, Cougar Gulch is on the south of the Spokane River, and that cut it off from Coeur d'Alene. One of the reasons they drew the reservation as they did is because that would prevent the Coeur d'Alene tribe from crossing the river into the populated area. But it also, when they changed that allotment, it kept everybody who moved out there away from the Coeur d'Alene area. There is a description of life from Oliver Biddleston. Oliver passed away recently. He'd be just over 100 years old. Oliver described living in his cabin as they used chairs. Our chairs were boxes for years until Papa made some benches out of them. And boxes also served as cupboards until Mama devised a cupboard from the large boxes that came packed full from the east. They would put shelves in them, but they always had laundered white curtains, and he didn't understand how his mom could always find a way to create laundered white curtains and a tablecloth. He discovered that she could use newspaper by pasting it on their smoke-covered walls of the cabin to cover the holes in the chinking. So they get newspaper and kind of create a chinking within their cabin each year, and then pull the newspaper off to get rid of the soot from their fires. So these are our homesteaders, and a couple of our homesteading families are here today. So we'll start with the Johnson family. So Euro-American settlers really started to move in the 1890s and early 1900s. They came from Sweden, Norway, and Germany primarily. What's interesting about the Gulch is it doesn't follow a pattern of a group or ethnicity moving into an area as, families. These were individuals, so it's not like the Amish where, people of a particular faith, particular ethnicity moved in as a group. Each one of the families that moved in there was unrelated or not necessarily from the same country, so they all had very different backgrounds, and they made their way to North Idaho in very different ways. They obtained property rights through the Homestead Act, which was they offered 160 acres to anyone who resided on and improved the land or property for 5 years, or you could purchase the land for $1.25 per acre. So my next question is, how much does an acre of land in Cougar Gulch cost today? $100,000?
There's a 5-acre parcel and it was $385,000 with nothing on it. That was about $100,000.
I believe it. I found one that's a 20-acre parcel. It's going for $1.25 million or $62,000 an acre right now. I think $1.25 sounds a lot better. I'd even work to improve the property. It says, so in some of the research we've done, and I'm going to acknowledge the Johnson family here, if that's okay. The Johnson family is up front. So they are original homesteading family. So several of the earliest Cougar Gulch homesteaders purchased the rights to their property from squatters. So if you heard Tom Richards talk, people love to run out there and squat for a while with their hopes and dreams of getting either a preemption right or a homesteading right. But living out there is very, very hard. And in the lumber industry, you could easily be either threatened off your land or have your land purchased right out from underneath you. So it was really competitive to have any land at all. But according to Morris Johnson, his grandfather, John Peter Johnson, borrowed $10 from 10 different friends to pay for his property. When the original settler, his name was David Pfeiffer, he could not afford to do the improvements. So J.P. Johnson and his wife Sally moved to the property in 1897. They lived in a cabin, and then they eventually built their house in, I believe, 1902. As the finished frame home, and then they established the Meadowview Dairy. So you can see here that this is a framed home, their barn, the milk house, bunkhouse, and then the Meadowview Dairy, and that is John Peter and Sally. Oh, excuse me, that is not John Peter. That is Clara. There you go, Clarence and Alta. So they, the Pfeiffers actually moved into town, and they built a saloon. Sally Johnson had a sister, Nellie. Nellie married the Nicholas Rhodius, who we'll talk about as well, in the fall of 1897, and they stayed with some family members until they too decided to homestead, and they paid $300 for improvements on a lot that included a log cabin, a barn, and it came with a cow. So, in some of our research, we've seen that Nellie believed that the log cabin may actually have been built by a trapper who lived out in Cougar Gulch. And here is, oops, go back. Here is the Johnson family property today. So it is right at the intersection of US 95, Cougar Gulch Road, and Meadowbrook. This is the original home. I believe you're Swedish.
No, I'm Danish.
You're Danish. They are all Swedish. So it's painted in the colors of Sweden. We have the original red barn and the bunkhouse you saw. And they recently received the Century Farm Award, meaning that their family has owned and lived on the property and used it for agricultural purposes for 100 years. So the next property that's fairly interesting is the Jarrett MONI homestead. And if you think back to where Highway 95 was at the beginning, where I was kind of showing you, it actually used to be right next to Highway 95 was the home. That was removed when Highway 95 was built. There's another home, but this is the original silo. Now, how do you build a silo like that? Does anybody know how you build that kind of silo? You take boards and you lay them flat and you stack them one on top of each other to build the silo. So it is not constructed with any kind of, it's got a vertical frame and that holds it, and then these boards are stacked to create the silo. This is the original cabin, which is still there, and then this is the MONI barn. So has anybody bought a Christmas tree from the Carousel Tree Farm? Oh, I see a hand back there. So the Carousel Tree Farm, as we know it, is actually the Stockman property. So the Stockmans, they acquired a homestead. This barn here, I have been able to put a date of 1896 on for the Stockman barn. It's still standing. It is eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, and it will be added hopefully this fall is the goal. This is the home. It has been modified. And when we had the horizontal volcanic flume, that's on this property as well. You can see this one from Highway 95 as you exit the gulch and go up into the Micah area. This is the Wolski Heine homestead. And we have Joyce Heine here tonight, who's a descendant of the Heines. And so the Wolskis moved into what is the end of now Heine Road, named after the Heines. This is their original homestead. This is Ms. Wolski and her betrothed, Mr. Biddleston. So yes, the people of Cougar Gulch married each other. This is the original barn. This did collapse. Joyce, can you remember when it collapsed?
It would have been 1949. There was a Chinook, and yes, and we had livestock. We had dairy cows, and my mom was just finishing up the chores and decided to go upstairs to the house and have a cup of coffee. And it was at that time, we were little kids, and so we were told to stay in the house. It was at that time that the barn went down. Oh. And I remember her saying, Joyce, the barn went down. And we had cattle.
Yes. Yeah. And it was reconstructed. You can see the different construction side between the two sides of the barn. So this is also eligible to be placed on the registry as well. I should have mentioned, so is the Johnson property. Now we'll talk about the Biddleston homestead. So I live on the Biddleston property, and I believe that two others here today, I'm not going to sit, Tom and Judy, they also live on the Biddleston homestead. We are a small subdivision of 5 to 10 acre lots now. The building that remains is the Biddleston barn. This has been remodeled by Don Myers, and it is in working condition. This is Ms. Wolski and Mr. Biddleston. I believe his name's Cyrus. This is the Biddleston homestead. If you go out there now on the top of Meadowbrook, it's located in the middle of Meadowbrook, it was cleared for a hayfield, and we live in a hayfield. If you look out there, it is flat, and if there's a tree planted, it's because one of us built a house on there and planted a tree. But as you can see here, that's what it looked like in the 1890s, early 1900s. This is the Getz Harrison homestead. This is at the very, very end of Cougar Gulch Road. So a little story about school buses. So if you went to school in Cougar Gulch, I think after 1944, you could have been bused into town. So the bus would drive all the way to the end of Cougar Gulch Road and turn around on this property by this barn right here. The bus doesn't go that far anymore because I guess it's unsafe. It's a one-lane gravel dirt road all the way to the end here. That mill that I showed you earlier with the big wheel, this is where it was located. Cougar Creek begins in this property area. These two barns remain standing as well. This is the O'Reilly homestead. So this is on Thompson Road. It's now owned by the O'Keefes, and again, I don't know why our pictures are flipping, but this barn is still standing, but this is the barn, the original barn of the O'Reilly homestead. There is a picture. I haven't been given permission to use it yet because it's got two people in it, but they are standing in front of this barn, and you can see the 1910 fire coming behind them. And it would be on this ridge right here. Now we have the Rodius homestead, and we're going to talk quite a bit about the Rodius family. So Nicholas Rodius married Nellie Benson, who was the sister of Sally Benson, who became Sally Johnson. So these young couples all moved to the Gulch to homestead. This is the Rodius homestead. It was quite large. They acquired substantial acreage as a result of their homesteading efforts. This house kind of remains. It would be right here in this more updated photo, but it's been significantly modified. There are 3 original outbuildings, the barns right here, and you can see Cougar Creek runs right through the middle of the property. There is a horse arena that's constructed now on the property. But the Rodius family, they acquired so much of the property that there is, we'll talk about the school and the community hall that they were instrumental in creating. So this is a Metzger map of the homesteads of Cougar Gulch. So if you look at these plats, everything you can see is eventually taken over as part of the homesteading process. So we have the Johnson property here, the MONI property that we were talking about. This says Bobbitt, but it's actually the Carousel Tree Farm. We have through here the Rodius properties. We have the Meadowbrook area. This is the Biddleston property. So you can see that there was, when people moved in, they took their 160 acres. They lived very, very far apart from each other, and they had 2 main arterial roads for which they could travel and communicate. So when we went out and did our survey, we made a map, this convenient color-coded map of the homesteads and when they were approved. Proving a homestead means that they proved that they either purchased it or they made the improvements or they did a combination of both. These are the early ones, these are the later ones. So you can see the population spread up the Gulch to the southwest, and people moved in and took their allotments. These red areas are the properties that I have found with buildings that are eligible to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is another map of the eligibility to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places. You can see this is, again, we have the Johnson properties, we have the MONI property, the Rodius property here. We have a number of the, this is the Getz Harrison property at the end. So all of these properties contribute to making this a district. And since we've actually made this map, we've found 2 others. So we have a substantial number that are eligible for that listing. So we'll talk just briefly about the Rhodius family. Does anybody know about Sam Rhodius? Does anybody remember Sam Rhodius? No? So there's only one member of the Rhodius family that I found that's still living. So Nellie Benson Rhodius, by the name, her name is not Nellie Benson, and Sally Benson was not Sally Benson, but I guess they had some names that were of such complicated pronunciation, they just changed their names when they moved here. And this is Nicholas Rhodius. They had 3 children, Lucia, Sam, and Emil. Now, the Rhodius family, they created somewhat of a kind of local land empire and were very influential in the development of the Meadowbrook Community Hall. So who uses the term Cougar Gulch Grange? Who's wrong to use the term Cougar Gulch Grange? So that's right. So we are not part of the Grange system. The community hall is actually a farmers union. So the people of Cougar Gulch unionized as farmers to help with price fixing, get their products to market, to be part of the National Farmers Union organization for support. So they created this hall in it was finished in 1912. But this building has a story to it. So this is the front part of the building. This is the Union Hall. It's built on land donated by the Rhodius family. The back portion right here we'll talk about used to be a school. But this first part of the community hall was kind of the center of the Cougar Gulch community. What I can tell is that the union membership was really pretty high for our area. We have handwritten minutes that go back to 1912, 1913. These are some of the original documents. And this here is a map of the location of the Meadowbrook Community Hall. So you see Cougar Creek is across the street. This side was part of the Rhodius property. We have an upper parking lot that was also part of the property. This was all donated by Sam Rhodius, Nick and Nellie's son. And it's run by an organization called the Sam Rhodius Memorial Park Association today. So it is a nonprofit that owns and runs the community hall. This is the first members of the nonprofit. You might recognize some of these names. Ray Oliver, he lived out on the Lanyon property on Greens Ferry. Elmer Munt, he owned what was the Biddleston homestead. Sue Bunn of Bunn Road, that's the very end of the gulch up on Greens Ferry. So these individuals created the nonprofit. This is from the 1980s. We have these great photographs, lots of Polaroids from the parties. So you might want to look and make sure you're not in one of them if you're one of the people who attended the great parties out there at Cougar Gulch. So let's talk about, I promised everybody a school mystery, and I kind of have one. So this is the Meadowbrook School, and this is the first class to graduate from the Meadowbrook School. So the Meadowbrook School was built on the lot next to Cougar Gulch Community Hall, and one of the, or some of the first graduates include the Rhodius children. This over here, this woman on the very far left, that's Lucia Rhodius, and there are a number of Biddlestons in here. We have a number of the MONIs, so we have a number of our local families that all attended school there. This is probably, in my estimation, the second or third school, and I'm not sure which, that was built in Cougar Gulch. It had its own school district until 1944. This is Cougar Gulch School number 3. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. It's also all the way at the end of Cougar Gulch. I believe that this was built in 1923. And it was used as a school until 1944, and it was built on the Ulrich property. it too still stands, and it's exactly the same design and footprint as the Meadowbrook School. Now, why is that important? The back side of the Meadowbrook Community Hall is the Meadowbrook School. So in 1940, I believe it was 48 or 49, the Works Project Administration came out, picked up the school, moved it down the hill, and attached it to the back of the Farmers Union Hall. The building does not have a foundation. It's on cinder blocks. It's held together by turnbuckles. And it's recently been resited, and it was not insulated at all until maybe 4 or 5 years ago when that was upgraded. So if you walk, this would be the front of the school walking in, and there's a bathroom on each side. Those are the bathroom windows. And they used to be the coat rooms. Now the interior is the kitchen that services the rest of the community hall. So the mysterious school is this one. This may have been on the Johnson property. I've heard it called two things: the Cougar Gulch School number 1, and also the Temerick School. And I only know that this is around, this was at least standing sometime in 1903-ish, or excuse me, 1901-ish, because this is, these are two of the Rhodius children that are standing in front of it, and that's one of their teachers. I have seen this particular building used on register applications, and it's been called the Meadowbrook School, and it's been called Cougar Gulch School number 3. So if we go back and look, that doesn't look like the same building. And that doesn't look like the same building. So what is this building? So I have 2 stories about this building. One is from the newspaper. You can see in this paragraph right here, it says that the Cougar Gulch School was burned to the ground last night. It's from 1901. An attempt was made to destroy this building with dynamite previously. So not only would a cougar get you on your way to school, wow, somebody might blow up your desk after you go home. So why would anybody, this is my final question for you all today, why would anybody dynamite a school in 1900?
Didn't like the ethnic group that was there. They may not have liked the Indians if the Indian children were going. There's a whole bunch of haters out there who will find reasons to hate.
Anybody else?
It was too far away for his kids to go to school.
Oh, that's a good practical reason. Yeah, who wants to walk that far with the cougars around, right? So I think it was money. I see that's it. Yeah. So if you had a property and you had a school on it, you got paid money. Yeah, so you were performing a public service, and so it could be nice to have a property with a school on it. I think that this building here is probably the one that was burned. It's most likely. If it's not, then it was the building that was built after the one that's referenced as burned. Now, I have heard some gossip. I'm not going to say which person in the Gulch told me this, but it's more than one. And it was that Nick Rhodius snuck up to that school and he tried to dynamite it, and it didn't work. And Nick Rhodius went back later and he put a candle underneath it and it burned, so that he could have it taken off somebody else's property and he could build a Meadowbrook School on his property for his kids and for that tax break. So those are the 2 rumors I've had, and that's the school mystery that we've been trying to solve. So that's what I have to offer about Cougar Gulch. We continue to work to try to put it on the National Register of Historic Places. I encourage you to drive slowly through the Gulch, slowly, please. We're slow people out there. And tour the barns. There's 38 barns, so if you are somebody who really likes to look at a barn, You will not be disappointed. Just take a drive, Sunday drive through those. If you would like to become a member of the Cougar Gulch Community Hall, we have a website. It's $25 or $30 a year, I think, to support our nonprofit. And of course, I'm a member of the Museum of North Idaho. I hope you're all members of the Museum of North Idaho. And I would love to either answer questions or hear your thoughts about the Gulch area. Deb? Oh, yes, thank you. My sound file apparently isn't going to work on. Oh, that's a good one.
That's not it there. Nope, that keeps popping up. I had it planned.
Let me see if I can get it to work on. Technology is so fun, isn't it? No wonder everybody moved to the Gulch. No, it didn't. Well, while we work again on more technology, any other comments or questions about the Gulch? Yes?
Do you need a permit or permission to go on that property to look at the barn and the school?
So yes and no. So to go to the community hall, that's a public place. You can, of course, go there. If you would like to get off the road at any point and go onto anybody's property to look at the barn, yes, you would need permission to do that. Most of the barns are visible from the road, so you can just stop on the road and take a look at them. I mean, I think that the reason that they are formulated that way. Oh, here we go.
That's rain.
Whoa. There you go. That's what a cougar sounds like. Thank you, Deb. So the barns are built close to the road because they, of course, wanted the road to get as close to their barn as possible. The O'Reilly barn, it's ridiculous. It's like that far from the road. It's like on the road. So you can see them. They wanted to be able to travel into their barn and leave their barn with as little effort as possible.
Is it okay if we drive up there through and take photos of these old barns?
Yes, I mean, it's just public. We are, we're a public area. Just, of course, be respectful of people's privacy if you see, individuals out there. But yeah, I mean, it's just like driving down the street. All the roads up there are public except for the ones with blue signs, which are private. But you can still drive down those roads. April?
You might have mentioned this, but I came in a little bit late. When did they sell off all the cows? I mean, there's absolutely no farming out there except maybe just small little hobby farms.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, so we are currently a hobby farm community of 5 and 10 acre lots, but mostly there were a few dairies and then the subsistence farming. There were not a lot of large ranches. There was some goat farming. Most of it dwindled in the late 1960s. And I don't know if it's also because that is when the bridge over the Spokane River was finally built. So we could drive in from the Gulch and you could come to town. So it used to be if you lived out there, you had to drive over like a wooden barge into the North Idaho College area, and people just didn't come to town. So I think once they started getting that access to town, they could get a job, they could drive their children into school. Once it was just easier to come in, one of the patterns I am picking up on is that men would get a job in town and women would run the farms. So they would mostly raise chickens, goats, milk, and then they would do that as a kind of a second income. So like Louise Oliver was the farmer on her property. So I think it had to do with that once they could come in and access the city, then there was less use for a lot of the agricultural activity.
But Elmer Munn had a lot of cattle out there until recently when he passed away. Probably Elmer Munn.
Yeah, so Elmer Munn, Grassman of the Year in 1964. He owned what was the Biddleston property. He acquired most of it, and it is like I said, giant hayfield. And so he would graze cattle. He would also sell hay, and I believe they told me that he would die on his tractor. And I think he almost did, because I think he passed away 5-6 years ago maybe, and he was still driving his tractor. Yes. Yeah. Any other thoughts about Deb?
Is there still a 4-H club out there?
Oh gosh, the 4-H Highlanders. So the 4-H Highlanders were they were a group until the late 90s. Then they stopped, and then they were started again in 2012, and then they stopped again. And so most of the children are part of the MICA 4-H clubs that is formed at the MICA Grange. And we have an interesting relationship with the MICA Grange. We're somewhat close to each other, physically. So there was a lot of interaction between the people of MICA Flats and Cougar Gulch. So they would hold contra dances and square dances, and they would compete in 4-H together, and they would marry each other, and they would go on dates together, and they would go to Worley and do who's knows what's together. So a lot of people were really, really connected between those two, between the community hall and the MICA Grange, including through 4-H. Kelly?
So, Courtney, were you guys successful in having it be 5-acre minimums?
Yes. So, yes, thank you for bringing that up. So the residents of the Gulch recently had our zoning changed so that we have 5-acre minimum lots. We were 2 acres starting in the 1980s, although I don't know who wants to own 2 acres out there, because you have to have your own well and you have to have your own septic. We do not have a water system, and we actually have some significant water issues because we are all on wells. So we are now a 5-acre minimum, and it's going back to our question on buying acreage. Good luck finding it if you can get it. And if you get it, I hope it has some water on it. So yeah.
So it's just hitting an active well, a crapshoot?
I'm not quite sure anymore. I know that they've had to dig deeper, and we did recently have a subdivision approved with 5-acre lots, and my understanding is the wells are 1,200 feet deep and not producing to the capacity for a household. So, for example, most of our wells, I think mine's like 180 feet deep. So it is a challenge. It is a volcanic glacial area with all kinds of layers of rock. The water table ebbs and flows with the lake and the runoff. I mean, it's not a guaranteed water source. Virginia.
I live in a lucky place because we have springs.
Yes.
And when they built the new subdivision, the Ridge, which we fought against for 10 years, I must tell you, we got a new spring for them.
Oh.
And so now we have abundant water.
Yeah.
When the developers started to build that, the first thing they did was to come and ask my husband if they could get the water, and he said, and I quote, "Go to hell."
Yeah, so there are a number of, there's some artesian wells, there's springs, there's runoff. I know some people actually have water rights from the east side of Highway 95, which flow down into the Cougar Bay area and down into the Rhodius and the MONI property. There are some water rights that are retained from that. The community hall itself does not have potable water, so if you want to drink the water, we bring in the water, but we have a cistern that's fed from a spring off of the back of the property to run, the toilets and the faucets.
I'm going want to make one other comment. I'm curious to know if other people who live in that area have hunters who come and want to hunt right on their property. I've had more than one because we have a big field down there.
Yeah.
And the elk come and chew their cuds. And people come knock on my door and say, is it okay if I hunt on your property? I say, no, those are my elk, and I have named them. They're Elmer and Eliza and Elizabeth. Hunting means you get in your car and you go out into the wilderness and you find them.
Yes.
You hike and you don't stand in the road and shoot them.
And I do have a little bit of a story about that. So we do have the elk herd. I'm not going to talk too much about the elk herd because we all love our elk herd. And it's a seasonal migration that we enjoy and pick up a lot of poop after. But they do move through in the spring and the fall. And I asked, why don't I see in these records a lot of stories about elk hunting? I see deer hunting, I see cougar hunting, I see raccoons, badger, whatever. But there's not a lot of historical stories about elk hunting. We have all these elk. So I asked Jody Munt and a number of others, and they all told me that sometime in the late 60s, an elk herd that was domesticated by YJs in Post Falls escaped, and they all think it came up over Greens Ferry and into the Cougar Gulch area, because we do have a strange migrational pattern of the elk. They come down into Cougar Bay and then they go up into Signal Point, and they don't necessarily go south. They kind of just go in a circle.
Yeah, what year did you say that the bridge over the Spokane River was built? And how did you get to Cougar Gulch before that bridge was built?
Joyce can tell you. Yeah, the old bridge. Yeah, and you think about like the one weak link in a chain. So Highway 95, of course, goes from Boise all the way to Canada, right? So there's a couple weak links, and that's one of them. So there was a wood bridge that you had to take from Blackwell Island over into the North Idaho College area until that giant bridge was built in the 60s. There's a couple other weak links maybe you're hearing about, like in Riggins, where they're replacing the bridge where the time change is. But that is the north-south arterial. And yeah, so they drove over a wooden bridge, or they would go into Post Falls and take Greens Ferry across.
With the water problem, is it true that there's another big development going in west of the ridge development?
Yeah.
Impact the water?
I would ask the same question. So there is acreage over there. The Heine family has placed a conservation easement on portions of that property or that area. There would be a big challenge because it is located on Blossom Ridge, and Blossom Ridge is a big ridge of basalt rock. I know the Ridge subdivision is attached to the city of Coeur d'Alene water system, so it would be either create a water system or do individual wells. I know they've done it, so how they go about it, I think, remains to be seen. It'd be really interesting to see if they could find enough well space, well water on that ridge to make that work as far as wells. In Lewiston, they built up the big hill. Same in Pocatello, they've built up a big hill, and they do a reverse water system that pumps up a hill. So who knows? I say good luck to them. Oh, we have a question in the back there?
I never heard anything about Pointner in your talk. Was he considered a Cougar Gulch resident?
If I remember right, he's the man who owned the area around Cougar Bay. Is that right? Yeah. So I appreciate that question, because this is my struggle in defining the gulch, because Pointner, he owned the land around the bay and at the bottom, but he didn't really have activity up the gulch itself. So I would say that if he wants to be a member of the gulch, we would welcome him if that's what he'd like to do. But otherwise, he's the pointer of Cougar Bay. Yes. But we all go see his bulldozer that's still out there in his property. Any other questions or comments? I think I saw another one in the back. April?
Just a teeny question. Since you've spent a lot of time out there, do you have any information like with maybe the Native American use? I know there's a camas field out there. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
And so when I did just verified, it's very unusual to see camas like that.
You know, a lot of the native ecology of the gulch really remains. It was such a struggle to clear land or to do much out there. I'm surprised. I mean, there's a sequoia tree out there that's over 100 years old. There is camas that, presents itself seasonally. It was a tribal traffic area into what's now Post Falls. I would not be surprised if that's one of their sources. If you know the Coeur d'Alene tribe history, camas is near and dear to their survival. Camas root. If you've had it, I say everybody should have it once. Just like taro from Hawaii, give it a whirl. But there was a significant amount of native activity. There's another photograph I'm not able to share of the Biddleston homestead with 2 native children that actually just showed up and moved in with them for a while, and then they would disappear. So yeah, there was plenty of native activity. Well, thank you all for coming. Again, support the Museum of North Idaho and the Meadowbrook Community Hall. We do have events throughout every single month at the Community Hall if you'd like to join us for those. And thank you to Jordan and to the library for having us tonight.
Thank you.